The great hall of Nightfall Palace had never been so silent. Hundreds of pack members stood shoulder to shoulder along the stone walls, their breath held, their eyes fixed on the woman standing alone at the center of the marble floor. Ilara Voss had worn the title of Luna for 3 years. She had bled for this pack, healed its wounded, and stood beside its Alpha King through 2 wars and a famine. Tonight, none of that seemed to matter. Alpha King Damien Cross stood a few steps away from her, his broad shoulders rigid, his jaw tight. Beside him stood a woman Ilara had never seen before, dressed in silver silk, her golden eyes glowing faintly with the unmistakable shimmer of a fresh mate bond. Seraphine. The name had only been whispered in the palace for a single day, yet already it hung over Ilara like a verdict. Ilara Voss, Damien said, his voice carrying across the hall without effort, the way a king's voice always did. Our bond was one of arrangement, not fate. I have found my true mate. From this night, you no longer hold the title of Luna of Nightfall. Ilara felt the words land like physical blows, one after another. She searched his face for some flicker of hesitation, some sign that this was difficult for him too. She found none. His eyes were calm, almost relieved, as though he had been waiting for permission to say this for a long time. 3 years, she said quietly, her voice steady, even as her hands trembled at her sides. 3 years, Damien. 3 years of duty, he corrected, not of fate. You understand the difference better than anyone. You are a healer. You know the body does not lie about what the heart already knows. Around them, the pack members shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. No one ever spoke against an Alpha King in his own hall. Ilara looked once more at Seraphine, who offered her a small, satisfied smile that did not reach her eyes, and something cold settled in Ilara's chest. She could not explain it, not yet, but instinct told her that smile was wrong. It was the smile of someone who had won a game the rest of them did not know they were playing. She did not argue further. There was no point. She removed the silver pendant that marked her as Luna, placed it gently on the floor before the throne, and walked out of the hall with her back straight, refusing to let a single tear fall until the palace doors closed behind her. By dawn, she was gone from Nightfall territory, exiled by custom and by her own choice. She walked for 2 days through unfamiliar forest, her strength fading, her wolf too wounded in spirit to shift and run. On the second night, cold and weak, she collapsed near a border stone carved with a crest she did not recognize, a silver wolf circling a crown of thorns. The last thing she remembered was the sound of heavy footsteps approaching through the trees, and a low growl that was not threatening but startled. She woke in a bed she did not know, wrapped in blankets that smelled of pine and wood smoke. Sunlight filtered through tall windows into a room far simpler than anything in Nightfall Palace, yet somehow warmer. A woman in a healer's apron was changing the cloth on her forehead, and when she noticed Ilara's eyes open, she smiled with relief. You are in Ashwood territory, the healer said. King Roan found you at the border 3 nights ago. You have been asleep since. King Roan, Lara repeated, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. You will meet him soon enough. He has asked after you every single day. Ilara did not know what to make of that. Kings did not usually concern themselves with strangers found half dead at their borders. She assumed it was simple duty, the kind of formal courtesy any ruler might show. She was wrong. That evening, King Roan Ashwood came to see her himself. He was tall, broad through the shoulders like most alphas, but there was something different in the way he carried himself. Something quieter than the commanding presence Damien always wore like armor. A pale scar ran along his jaw, and his eyes, a deep amber, studied her with a caution she did not understand. You are awake, he said simply. Good. Thank you for finding me, Ilara said. I did not mean to trespass on your land. You did not trespass. You collapsed at a border stone that has not been crossed by an outsider in 5 years. He paused, his gaze lingering on her longer than politeness required. May I ask your name? Ilara. Something shifted in his expression when she said it, a flicker of surprise quickly hidden. He did not explain it, and she was too exhausted to ask. He simply nodded, told her to rest, and left the room. She did not think much of the moment then. Later, she would understand it changed everything. Over the following days, Ilara regained her strength within the walls of Ashwood Palace. She learned that Roan had lost his own mate years earlier, before the bond could even fully form, and had ruled alone ever since, refusing every attempt by his council to arrange a new match. The staff spoke of him with quiet respect, not fear. He was known as a fair king, a serious one, not given to warmth. Yet every evening, without fail, he visited her chambers to ask how she was healing. At first, she assumed it was guilt, or perhaps simple hospitality, extended to a wounded stranger. But the visits continued even after she was strong enough to walk the gardens herself. He asked about her day. He noticed when she had not eaten enough. He arranged for warmer blankets when he saw her shiver near an open window, without being asked. Small things, ordinary things. Yet no one had ever paid her this kind of attention before, not even during her years as Luna. One evening, as she sat in the garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Roan joined her without a word, simply lowering himself onto the bench beside her. His wolf had been restless for days, he admitted quietly, ever since she arrived. He had felt something he could not name, a pull he had dismissed at first as concern for an injured guest. "I do not believe it is only concern," he said, his voice low. "I believe you may be my fated mate, Ilara. I have felt nothing like this since I was a young man, and even then, it was never this strong." Ilara's breath caught. "That is not possible. I already bear a mate mark, a false one perhaps, given how easily it was dismissed, but a mark nonetheless." "May I see it?" She hesitated, then drew back the collar of her dress to reveal the faint silver mark at her shoulder, the one Damien had barely glanced at in 3 years of marriage. Roan studied it closely, his brow furrowing. "This is not a true bond mark," he said finally. "It is dimmed, suppressed. I have seen this before, long ago, on wolves cursed at birth by rival packs to hide their true fated connection. It is rare, but not unheard of. If I am right, your true bond was hidden from you your entire life." Ilara stared at him, her mind racing back through years of confusion, of feeling like something essential was missing even in her marriage to Damien, of never quite understanding why the bond felt hollow despite her devotion. It began to make a terrible, aching kind of sense. Roan did not press her for an answer that night. He simply took her hand, gently, and told her that whatever the truth turned out to be, he intended to treat her with the honor she deserved, for as long as she remained in his kingdom. It was not a demand, it was a promise. In the weeks that followed, Roan proved himself a man of his word, in ways that quietly rebuilt something in Ilara she had thought was broken beyond repair. He restructured his own council meetings so he could personally oversee her care each evening, rather than leaving it to servants. He asked her opinion on matters of the kingdom, not as a formality, but because he genuinely wanted to hear it. When rumors began circulating among his court, questioning why their king was so devoted to an outsider, he addressed them directly and without hesitation, declaring before his own council that he believed Ilara to be his true fated Luna, curse or no curse, and that anyone who disrespected her, disrespected him. It was such a small thing, and yet it was everything. Damien had never once defended her publicly. Roan did it without being asked, simply because it was right. Word of Ashwood's devoted king traveled quickly between kingdoms, as such stories always do. It reached nightfall within a month, carried by traders and wandering wolves who spoke of a king who treasured his healer guest daily, who had claimed her before his court despite the political risk of an unconfirmed bond. When the news reached Damien, something in him that had been quietly unsettled since Ilara's departure grew louder. He found Seraphine in her chambers, her golden mate mark glowing faintly on her wrist, and for the first time, he studied it with real scrutiny instead of blind acceptance. It looked different from the marks he remembered seeing on true bonded pairs during his youth, dimmer somehow, artificial. When he asked her directly whether the bond was real, she grew defensive, then evasive, and finally, under the weight of his stare, she confessed. The mark had been created through a forbidden ritual, one that mimicked a true bond, convincingly enough to fool even an alpha king, desperate for an excuse to set aside a marriage he had never fully wanted. She had wanted Ilara's position, her influence, and she had taken it through deception. Damien said nothing for a long moment. Then he ordered her removed from the palace entirely, her false claims stripped, her presence banished from Nightfall territory. But the damage to his kingdom was already done. Alliances that had trusted Nightfall's leadership began to question his judgment. His council whispered about a king who could be so easily deceived. And beneath it all, a quieter, more painful truth settled over him. He had cast aside a woman who had given him 3 years of loyal devotion, for a lie that lasted barely a season. The two kingdoms were bound to meet regardless, at the annual border summit held between Nightfall and Ashwood, to renew old treaties. Elara attended at Rowan's side, not as a healer or a guest, but announced formally as his intended Luna. When Damien saw her enter the hall, dressed simply, but standing taller than he had ever seen her stand in his own palace, something in his chest tightened with a regret he did not know how to voice. During the summit, an elder healer traveling with the Ashwood delegation recognized the faint suppression pattern on Elara's shoulder and offered, with her permission, to attempt to lift it. The ritual was old but not dangerous, requiring only quiet concentration and the presence of the true fated mate nearby. Rowan stood beside her as the elder worked, and before the assembled courts of both kingdoms, the dimmed silver mark on Elara's shoulder brightened into a deep, unmistakable gold, matching a mark that bloomed simultaneously on Rowan's own wrist. Gasps rippled through the hall. The bond was real, undeniable, witnessed by everyone present. Damien stepped forward, his voice tight, and made one final attempt to claim their old arranged bond as still binding, insisting that tradition demanded she return to Nightfall as his Luna, regardless of what fate now showed. Elara looked at him, and for the first time since that night in the Great Hall, she felt no fear of him at all. "You had 3 years to treasure what was real," she said, her voice calm and clear enough for the whole hall to hear. "You chose duty over devotion, and then you chose a lie over duty. Fate does not owe you a second chance simply because you finally recognize what you lost." Rowan stepped beside her, taking her hand openly before both courts. "She is not a title to be reclaimed," he said to Damien. "She is a person who deserves to be chosen every day, not simply assigned. I intend to keep choosing her, as I have every day since she arrived in my kingdom." Damien had no answer to give. He returned to Nightfall with a weakened alliance and a hollow palace, the consequences of his own choices settling over him with quiet, permanent weight. In Ashwood, the crowning of the new Luna took place beneath a sky full of soft evening stars, surrounded by a court that had watched their king's devotion grow visible day by day, in small gestures and public honor alike. Elara stood at Rowan's side, wearing a mark that finally matched the truth of what she felt, in a kingdom that had shown her, gently and consistently, what it meant to be treasured rather than merely tolerated. She thought, as the crown settled lightly on her head, that she had once believed love was something owed by title or arrangement. Now she understood it was something built quietly, choice by choice, day by day, by someone willing to keep choosing you long after the excitement of a new bond had faded into the steady, patient work of care. Rowan had shown her that truth without ever needing to say it aloud, and standing beside him now, she finally believed it completely.